Welcome back to Watch Talk. On today we're talking about one of the most iconic, the most fabulous lines in the Rolex catalog. It is the Rolex Submariner. We're going to be starting from the 1953 Baselworld introduction till now. And then also I want to talk with you after what role it played in people in history and movies, and what type of a role or culture has gone around the Rolex Submariner, and what people's opinions have changed over the years with it and its purpose. Jumping right into it, so the Rolex Submariner was a waterproof Rolex. That's what it was meant. But the original waterproof Rolex came out in 1926. That was the oyster style case. So they took the oyster style case and they wanted to build a two-hole watch. And then they came up with the three models they released in Baselworld. It was the 6200. At this point, it's not that recognizable as a Rolex today. It was a big crown. Then they also came up with 6204 and the 6205. These were the three watches originally made with the there was the Submariner. The first one, the 6200, didn't even have Submariner on it. It was just a blank slate. All it had was Rolex Oyster Perpetual. Then the other ones, depending what type of model, it's either between 100 and 200 meters of water resistance. We're going to be talking about how they achieved this water resistance that was never achievable before, and the reliability of a Rolex later on. They did test extensively on this watch. This watch was the highest rated testing of, it didn't go negative. There's been dives where it's timed with the crown pulled out. With the crown pulled out, they put the watch under the water and it achieves it runs for hours. They did this one, I believe the crown was pulled out. They put it 130 meters under the water. That's an extra 30 meters than at the time it was 100 meters water resistance. And it ran for an hour and they pulled it up and it was still running. That's crazy for something at the time there was no such thing as real waterproof watches. The Blancpain 50 Fathoms was that was the original real watch, but Rolex, and that came out around the same era, and the only thing they beat Rolex on was the unidirectional bezel, which I'll be talking about later. So after these three models, then we look on the silver screen, we see the 6538. Where do I start with this watch? The name's Bond, James Bond. From Dr. No to all the way through Thunderball. He was wearing this watch. Rolex, of course, it brought sales in, right? Of course, if he's wearing a Rolex. They never paid him for the sponsorship. There was no payment. Omega, we see Omega, and I look at Omega, they're paying for it 100% there. They're the sponsor of James Bond now. But they chose, I don't picture James Bond wearing an Omega. It's a great watch. It really is. And the roots are there, but I always when I think of James Bond, I think of Rolex Explorer, because that's how Ian Fleming wrote the character, and I think of a Submariner. So, most people, unless they like the newer James Bond, they'll think of Omega, but that's just something I think of. We'll get to that in the film section, but I just wanted to mention this reference because it's trading at a crazy price, and we'll get to prices after this. So this watch, one of the most iconic Rolexes ever to hit the market, and it shows that, reflects that later on till now. So while he was making Thunderball and all these other movies with his Rolex, Rolex was actually releasing new watches. They were releasing their Heritage Collection, 5512 and 5513. And these are the Heritage, the old, grandpa kind of watches. That's what I don't think it's a grandpa watch. It was supposed to be more older style. And it reflects that, but it's a gorgeous watch. And now I have to say, Sean Connery's Rolex was a 38 millimeter. We didn't hit the 40 mil yet, and you'll see that because nowadays it's a 40 mil Rolex Explorer. It's been that for a long time. The biggest change to the Rolex Submariner is one of the biggest aesthetic, not the biggest, but one of the biggest, 1680. So the 1680 came out, And that was the first Rolex to have a date complication with the Cyclops. When you think of Rolex Explorer, unless you're talking about James Bond, you think about the Cyclops. That's one of the most defining features of a Rolex. A little trivia for you, the actual date complication, people call that the Submariner. They just call the date sub. But Rolex actually calls the Submariner the one no date. So people call the no date the defining one, and they call the Submariner the date one, but it's the opposite in Rolex. They call it the Submariner for just the no date, and the date, they call it the date Submariner. So it's a little trivia that they actually call it that way. And I find that funny because the public does the opposite way. So after that, there wasn't a real big change till 1979. That was the first year they added sapphire into their Rolex, the Rolex Submariner. So when they add sapphire to this watch, it adds another 100 meters of water resistance. So we're getting closer to what we have now. They have a 300 meter water resistance now. They also added trip lock crown in the 80s. I believe 79, they added the trip lock crown too. So this watch was huge. And later on in 1983, the same reference number, 16800, they added a unidirectional bezel in 83. And 83, why would you say, they said, why? That's very late in the game, let's be honest. 83 to have a unidirectional bezel. But Blancpain 50 Fathoms, going back to this watch, they actually had a patent on it. So they couldn't, made it very hard for Rolex and other companies to get a unidirectional bezel until 83. And that's when they adopted it to them. So very, interesting. And you'll notice Rolex is a little late in the game to some things, but they're very early in the game to others, and the reliability is unquestionable with any other watch. So the first one, this is the most modern iteration, has the Cerachrome ceramic, that's what they call it, the Cerachrome bezel. I believe the original was 116610, the first Rolex, and it was solid gold, I believe. And then they brought it down to all their regular models too. And that was aesthetic change to the Rolex Submariner since the original. The crown guards came in too, I have to mention that. I believe the crown part of the Heritage Collection. Now, after talking about the models and the years it's gone through, let's talk about what really the core of the Rolex Submariner represents. Well, no matter what it is, since the 60s, even the 50s, it's been a symbol of tool. It's a tool watch, and it is probably one of the most versatile watches ever made. I'm just saying that out there. If you look at James Bond, he's wearing a tuxedo with it. He's wearing a diving in Goldfinger. Like that. That's just, he can wear it any place, and he doesn't need other watches. So it is a real one watch collection. It's accurate. It's just one of the most, I think, known watches out there, the Rolex Sub. Unlike the Datejust and the Day-Date lines, there's no change really, as he has a big crown, the meters. We went over all the change, but that's about it. There's not so much change with the Submariner. Now it's very luxury. It's a luxury item. The two watches I think that I could have a one watch collection are the Rolex Submariner and the Rolex Explorer, because those two watches can cover anything. You can dress in a tux, you can go to the beach with them, you can do whatever you want with these types of watches. And now I would like to talk to you slightly about price. So for Submariners brand new, starting around $7,500, so that's the no day complication. Also, you have to realize that that watch for $7,500 is close to around $10,000 because you can't find them. They're more expensive. Now they're all north of $10,000 because they have a waiting list for 3 years. And it amazes me because I like to see how well Rolex is doing. They deserve this kind of praise. They deserve every sale they get of every watch they make. They earn it. They understand their customers, and they want to provide a watch that is almost perfect. It's almost a perfect watch. There is no perfect watch, but it is very, very close to one. So you're paying a few $1,000s more. There are about 2 to 3 year waiting list, I hear, for this stainless steel Submariner. Would you wait the 2 or 3 years or buy one? Well, First of all, 2 or 3 years is a long time. It's a very long time. And if you don't want to wait, because it is, if you made enough money where the $2,000 or $3,000 doesn't really matter to you that much, go and pick it up for a couple grand more, because you don't, and sometimes you can't even get on a list. You can't even get on the list of waiting. That's how much these are packed. So quickly talk about price. Yeah, if you can snag it out retail somewhere, go pay retail. Please go pay retail. But if you have to pay a little more, if you want to wait. And if you really want to, if you reward yourself, you did very good year of sales or your business is up, you could pay a little bit of premium if you want. So in conclusion, this watch is probably the most notorious watch. It's the most loved watch and probably copied, homaged in almost any way. That's what it is, period. It's the most recognizable diver in the world, the Rolex Submariner. I'm saying that honestly, I think it is. The SKX is probably one of the most also, but that's a different, price category, a different whole battle. But in the Rolex line and everything, I think is one of the most known. I want to thank you all for watching. This was one of my favorite episodes because I'm a huge James Bond fan. I love every Sean Connery movie. Nowadays, Omega and all that, but I think I like the roots of James Bond with the Rolex. Thank you all for watching. Please comment down below if you like the more vintage models or you like the more modern models with the lug difference or I like the big crown, but tell me down there which one you would actually prefer. Thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.